Okay, so here we are. There's a new broadcast now, obviously, so that's good. And let's get everyone here. There's a new broadcast now, obviously, so that's good. And let's get everyone here. There's a new broadcast now, obviously, so that's good. And let's get everyone here. There's a new broadcast now, obviously, so that's good. Let's get everyone here. Okay. Okay. So there we go. I think you guys finally can see. We'll start in a minute. I just sent out the email to everyone. With the new link, I apologize. 15 minutes late. I apologize for the technical difficulties. There was an issue with the camera. I don't know why it wasn't working, but it's working now. So that's what matters. And so that's what we are doing here. I'm just getting everything set up that I need, and we will be ready in just a minute. Let's see. Okay, so we have 12 viewers. So it seems like people know that this is going on. I'm just going to open up the page so I can see the questions, if there are questions being asked on the page. So let's see. There we go. Okay, good. Let's see. I'm just going to chat right here. Okay, so good to see this working here. And glad to see that you guys can actually see me. Just a reminder, you can send me questions either through the email, or you can send me questions via the app, the Q&A chat on the YouTube link. So either of those works. We'll do this for about an hour or so, and yeah, it should be good. So right now we have 12 people watching, so about half the class, guys. Yes, good job. I just want to spend a second just talking a little bit about what you should be doing tonight. Obviously, you should not have just started to study this evening. If you have, that's well, that's not good. But you should think about, as you're reviewing your materials, as you're thinking through the materials, you should really think about how the various topics, that we've discussed over the course of the quarter, how they relate to each other. And they seem like a difficult task, but each of the topics we covered falls under certain categories that we've described, whether it's religion, whether it's hierarchy, whether it's culture. And it's important for you to think about the material in that way, not just as facts to memorize, but thinking about the materials in comparison to similar developments or different things, whether it's looking at how empire emerges, for instance, in ancient Sumeria, and how empire emerges in Assyria. And so there you're comparing, again, the developments of empire in very different chronological periods, or whether it's looking at how geography affected this early civilizations, comparing whether geography affected the Indus Valley in the same way that it affected Mesopotamia or Egypt, for that matter. So those are the kinds of questions, and that's the way you should be thinking about the materials. Again, this is not new, but this is something that I've said consistently over in class. So let's talk a little bit about some of the questions that were asked. Let's see here. Just looking through some stuff here. There's a question that was asked just now. I think, hope you asked the question about dates. We answered this in class before. What I would say with dates is, first of all, you need to know the chronology. You need to know what happens in relation to other things. You don't need to know. I'm not interested if you are. I'm not interested if you can understand. If you can memorize dates. I don't care if you can tell me when Hammurabi lives. I'm interested in knowing that you understand when Hammurabi lived in relation to other people. So you can tell me Hammurabi lived before the Assyrians. Hammurabi lived before the Hittites, the Phoenicians, etc. That's what I'm interested in seeing. And so in terms of dates, you should know that Hammurabi lived around the 18th century BC. If you tell me that he lived in the 5th century BC, that's wrong. But if you tell me that he lived around 1800 BC, that's fine. If you tell me that he lived around 1900 BC, that's acceptable. I'm not going to be stringent on dates, largely because memorizing a date doesn't really get us very far and doesn't really get you anywhere in terms of understanding the material. So I hope that answers the question when it comes to dates. Okay, question from Jack. Will we need to know about the Paleolithic time period because it was one of the practice problems? No. The problems, the questions that I gave you were just sample questions to see what kind of questions I will be asking. That's all they were meant to do. They weren't meant to give you any insight into the actual into the content of the questions, but I wanted for you to see the style of the questions. You're not responsible for Paleolithic, Neolithic. That's not what we're going to be. You're not being tested on it, and it's not on the review sheet. We're starting, just to be clear, we're starting, again, the exam is on early civilizations. So it's on Mesopotamia, it's on the Indus Valley, it's on Egypt, it's on the ancient Israelites, it's on the Bronze Age cultures, the Hittites, the Minoans, the Mycenaeans, the Phoenicians, and the three empires that we discussed. Okay, so Paleolithic, Neolithic, not on the test. Ethan, what language did the Indus Valley develop? The Harappan culture, the Indus Valley culture developed a written language. Now, what we said is in contrast to hieroglyphics, in contrast to cuneiform, hieroglyphics being from Egypt, cuneiform being from Mesopotamia, the language of the Indus Valley has been impossible to decipher. We don't know what it is. We don't know what it means. We know they had a written language. We don't know what the written language means. One of the reasons why we haven't been able to decipher them is because we haven't found inscriptions that are either bi or trilingual. Remember, the reason why we can understand hieroglyphics and the reason why we know how to translate hieroglyphics comes from the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone provides hieroglyphics, it provides demonic, and then it provides Greek. We know how to read Greek, and we were able to, and historians and archaeologists were then able to identify the relationship between the Greek and the demonic. Once they saw that there was a relationship, they made the jump to think, and the logical jump to say that the hieroglyphics is the third text in that translation, that the demonic is a translation of the hieroglyphics, and the Greek is and the Greek is the translation of the demonic. That doesn't exist for the written language of the Indus Valley, of the Harappan culture. So we don't know how to decipher it. It has never been deciphered, and so that's that's something to you can think about that in comparison to, again, hieroglyphics, comparing it to cuneiform. Okay, good. So I hope that answers the question. Okay, so we're getting a couple of other questions coming in. Okay, a couple of other questions. Oh, awesome. More questions here. Okay, so let's take some questions here. Okay, let's take this from Jack. How did Mesopotamia become Sumeria, or if they just had a change of power, was it a different location? No. So it's when we talk about Mesopotamia and Sumeria, we talk about them interchangeably. They're the same thing. Mesopotamia and Sumeria are no different than each other. We call them the area of land is called Mesopotamia. The area, again, the area of land is called Mesopotamia. We call it the Sumerian culture because we call it Sumer because Sumer was one of the first. Sumer was the first civilization that takes root in Mesopotamia. And so we call Sumeria and Mesopotamia. We refer to them basically as the same thing. And so Sumer is simply the first civilization in Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is the area of the land. Sumer is the first civilization, but we use them interchangeably with each other, just to give you a sense of what that means. Okay. Let's see, what else do we know here? What do we need to know about? I'm just going to take out some of these comments once we talked about them. That's all. Okay. Let's see. Okay, what do we need to know about Cyrus? So we talked briefly about Cyrus, and what you should know about Cyrus really focuses on, I would say, first of all, the first element of Cyrus that is important is that Cyrus was a military genius in being able to conquer the Babylonians. But even more than his military genius, Cyrus's legacy has to do with his methods of governing. And we talked about a couple of methods. First is the creation of the satrapies. Remember the different, basically, states that the Persian Empire was broken down to. Remember, we mentioned the beginning of Megillat Esther where the beginning of Megillat Esther makes reference to 128 different Midinot. That was created by Cyrus. Cyrus creates different regions. And that's one element that Cyrus created. Another element was that Cyrus very much believed in honoring the local traditions of the peoples that fell under the Persian rule. So we saw this we talked about this in regards to, we read the passage from the psukim from Ezra, which described the fact that Cyrus allowed the Jews living in under the Persian Empire to return back to Eretz Yisrael. And then we also talked about the Cyrus cylinder. And the Cyrus cylinder gives us a very clear sense as to Cyrus is respectful of local customs. He allows people to return to their homes, even though the Cyrus cylinder doesn't specifically mention Jews or Israelites. Once we put the Cyrus cylinder together with Tanakh, we see a very clear picture. Cyrus was respectful of local cultures. He didn't do what the Assyrians did. Again, remember what the Assyrians did. The Assyrians, when they conquered a new land, they took the native people, the people living in that land, and they dispersed them in Assyria's own other areas, other lands. That's not what the Persians did. The Persians under Cyrus respected the local people, respected their local customs. Cyrus, when coming into a culture different than his, wouldn't destroy the temple. He would bow at the temple. And that is another important method when it comes to Cyrus, when it comes to the Persians, when it comes to Cyrus. Okay, good. I think that's, let's see, from Hope, can you go over the Bronze Age cultures briefly, each one? Okay, very briefly. We're not going to go into huge detail here because we spent almost a week on this. So, okay, so the Bronze Age. So the Bronze Age is characterized by the use of bronze. It's characterized by proto-writing. What we mean by proto-writing is basically early language, early alphabets. This is something that the Phoenicians create. The Phoenicians create the first language. Proto-writing is the earliest forms of this writing. So which are the cultures we talked about? We talked about the Indo-Europeans. The Indo-Europeans were nomads. They were nomadic. And we mentioned the Indo-Europeans as being an important nomadic people. Important because we can trace modern languages to the Indo-Europeans, to the Indo-Europeans. Almost all modern languages can be traced to the Indo-Europeans. One group of Indo-Europeans that we discussed who began to migrate around the year 1700, again, really 1600s, were the Hittites. The Hittites were Indo-Europeans that migrated into what is today modern-day Turkey. Again, we talked about them existing from about 1600 BC to 1180 BC. The Hittites, as we discussed, adopted or in their various conquests, they conquered the Babylonians, and they borrowed from the people from Babylon, meaning they borrowed from Mesopotamia, from the Mesopotamian cultures that came before them, art, politics, law, literature, and they borrowed them. They took these from the Babylonians, blending them with their own culture, sort of taking from the culture of those who are living in Mesopotamia, those specifically the Babylonians, and merging it with their own culture. The Hittites were very skillful when it came to the creations of war, of materials of war, specifically the creation of bronze and iron specifically, and they excelled in the technology of war, chariots, etc. That's what we talked about with the Hittites. We talked about the Minoans. The earliest Greeks were called the Minoans. In fact, we're going to come briefly back to the Minoans. Existed about 2000 to 1500 BC, living on the islands of Crete. We talked about three things when it comes to the importance of the Minoans: the developments of language, of trade and commerce, and of culture. The Minoans created or used a language called Linear A, which we can see when is not related to any other ancient language, and we cannot read Linear A today. What we know of the Minoans comes from the archaeological ruins, comes from the art that was found. The Minoans were advanced when it came to the building of ships. They created new technology for ships. They imported and exported tremendous amounts of material, imported copper, gold, ivory, exported the various natural resources that they had on Crete, timber, olive oil, wine, pottery, and jars that they created. One of the most important aspects of the Minoan culture is their art, or their frescoes, and that's something that we discussed, talking about the frescoes that they painted. People are always drawn in profile. They have a very clear social structure. What's very interesting about their social structure is that artists and artisans are part of their middle class, not part of the lower class, but part of their middle class. And in terms of their architecture, we talked about the palace at Knossos, where this was their major palace, a huge, tremendous palace, 800 rooms. The palace had indoor plumbing. And yeah, that's basically what we discussed with the Minoans. The Minoans were taken over by the Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans take over around 1450. Most archaeologists believe the Mycenaeans conquer by force. We talked about the fortress palace that's created by the Mycenaeans, which is really the center of each Mycenaean town. The main room called the Megaron. The Megaron was the central meeting place of these fortress palaces in each of the cities. The Mycenaeans also have a written language. They have Linear B. Linear B has been deciphered, and it was used for various purposes: administration, record keeping. The Mycenaeans also traded olive oil, and that was very important for them. And then finally, we talked about the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were Semitic speaking, meaning they spoke language that's similar to Hebrew and Arabic from the Middle East. They settled in what is today modern-day Lebanon. They didn't have many natural resources, so they turned to the sea, and they they created trading colonies and settlements all around the Mediterranean region. Colony is a region controlled by a distant country, and so they created all throughout the Mediterranean, whether it's in North Africa, whether in what's modern-day Spain. They created trading colonies, and they also created, and this is the last that we talked about them, the Phoenicians invented the world's first alphabets. 22 letters of the Phoenician alphabet, each had a different sound, and the Phoenician alphabet becomes the alphabet adopted by the Greeks. There's also commonalities with the with Hebrew language. So those are the Bronze Age cultures very briefly. Okay, good. All right. Let's see what else is right. What else is going here? From Isaac, can I go over the reading you gave us? No, we're not going over the reading. The reading I want you to do on your own. I know it's a little daunting. I know it's a little tough, but I think the reading is something that you guys can do. I have confidence that you can do the reading. I really do. Cheers, by the way. Coffee. Not necessarily the best idea to drink coffee at 8:40 at night, but we live on the edge here in the Zadoff household. Coffee at 8:40 at night. Ooh. Okay, let's take some more questions. Do we need to know about the Old Kingdom, pyramids, and Sphinx? The Old Kingdom, just talking about Egypt, very briefly, we went over the sort of the chronology of the different kingdoms in Egypt, the old, the new, the Middle Kingdom. Um, in terms of the old, you should know Menes. We talked about Menes uniting the upper and the lower region of Egypt in 3100 BC. He creates the first dynasty, the first pharaoh. We talked about the Old Kingdom, where we have the Great Pyramids built. That's really all we talked about, and that's really all you need to know. We did not talk about the Middle or the New Kingdom in any real detail. So that's really what you need to know. Good. Okay, let's take some more questions. Do we need to know about the other three Persian rulers? You need to know about the Persian rulers we discussed. So we talked about Cyrus, we talked about Cambyses, and we talked about Darius. Those are the three we discussed in class. You don't need to know about Xerxes. We didn't discuss Xerxes in class. So you don't need to, so you don't need to know about Xerxes. That's fine. Okay. I hope that answers that question. Okay, what is it? This is from Mr. Foreman. What's the difference between Persians and Assyrians? Is it their freedom? Okay, so yes. So one of the meaning when you're thinking about the Persians and Assyrians, good. So that's part of that's part of what this is what it is about. The Persians and Assyrians. One of the major differences is the fact that the Persians do respect the cultures of the people that they conquer, and that's an important difference between the Persians and the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians ruled in a very different way than the Persians. Remember, we talked about the Assyrians ruling. The Assyrians basically controlled their conquering territories by supporting local kings who aligned themselves with Assyria. This means that all of these territories that fell under the Assyrian rule had to pay taxes to the Assyrians. That was not how the Persians ruled. The Persians attempted to, and this is why they were successful, they created the various 128 territories that they used. The Assyrians attempted to rule their lands as basically a uniform, almost a unified kingdom. That's something which really is another way which separates the Assyrians and the Persians. Another important element is with the Assyrians. The Assyrians very much were focused intently, very specifically, on war. They valued conflict. They valued war. They glorified it. We talked about the fact that in the ruins of Nineveh, there were found wall carvings depicting lion hunts, but also battle scenes. The Assyrians glorified battle. The Assyrians glorified war much more so than the than the Persians did. So that's important too. This is just a follow-up. Do the Persians allow their conquered cities to keep independent governments? Yes, basically. And again, each not necessarily independence in that they still fell under Persian rule, but they did not have to keep to the same regard, they didn't have to keep to the same level of closeness like the Assyrians did. Again, we can see this again with the fact that Cyrus allowed ancient Israelites to go to Ezra and Nehemiah to go back to the land of Israel and to rebuild the temple, and they were given political freedom to build that land. So the Persians very much kept a distance from the Assyrians. The Persians kept very much a distance from their local the countries in which they conquered, in a way that the Assyrians didn't. Okay. Okay, let's look at some more questions here. Ethan, do we need to know about the Mycenaeans generally or their timeline as well? The timeline of the Mycenaeans, in terms of understanding their timeline, you need to, let me just take a look at their timeline. Meaning, yes, the timeline is important because the timeline is very important. It's not only for understanding the Mycenaeans, but for understanding ancient Greece in general. So, yes, you should know the timeline of the Mycenaeans. Also, to know sort of how the Mycenaeans, developed in relation to other important developments. So, it's not a lot to know there, but you should know that. Yes, absolutely. Kayla, what are the two Babylonian empires you mentioned today in class? I don't know what that means. We mentioned the Babylonian Empire of Hammurabi. That's the old Babylonian Empire. We mentioned the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which is the empire that defeats the Assyrian Empire, and then which is defeated itself by the Persians. Okay. All right, let's look for more questions here. Excuse me, guys. Can we explain the Zhou and the Shang dynasty? Okay. Yeah, we can talk about the Shang and the Zhou dynasty. Remember, we talked about the Shang and the Zhou dynasty as part of our discussion of the major empires, right? And so we talked about the Shang and the Zhou compared with the Assyrian, compared with the Persian Empire. So the Shang dynasty lasts from about 1600 to 1046. Many of the characteristics, though, that appear in the Shang dynasty also appear in the Zhou dynasty. So even though the Shang dynasty itself falls in 1046, many of the characteristics of the Shang dynasty continue on in the Zhou dynasty. So that's an important thing to remember. There is continuity there. There's continuation. We talked about the characteristics of the Shang and the Zhou dynasty. The Shang and the Zhou peoples saw themselves as the center of the world. They saw anyone who lives outside of civilization were barbarians. Let's see, sorry. They saw their culture as the center of the civilized world. In both the Shang and the Zhou culture, the collective is much more important than the individual, and the chief loyalty that you have is to the family. The family unit is the most important unit, is the most important group. Respect for one's parents was obviously tremendously important. The elder men in the family controlled the property. They made the important family decisions. And family in both the Shang and the Zhou dynasty, family was closely linked to religion. The spirits of family ancestors had the power to help living members of the family. And it's through the spirits that the Shang and the Zhou consulted gods. And it's through the spirits of family members who had passed away that that you consulted the gods. We talked about the Zhou dynasty, and the Zhou dynasty lasts from about 1056 to 256 BC. It lasts for a fairly significant period of time. We talked about the mandate of heaven. The mandate of heaven is the idea that God gives emperors the rights to rule based on their ability to govern well and fairly. And we talked about the dynastic circle in China as to how one rules. If one is ruling well, if one is ruling peacefully, then that's considered that you have the mandate of heaven. As time goes by, and if things decline, then you are then losing the mandate of heaven. And then you've lost the mandate of heaven once you're defeated, and the new civilization comes in, a new culture comes in, and starts to do good, starts to do well, and then at that point they claim to have the mandate of heaven. And that's what we talked about. You can think about sort of, a good way of, and this is an interesting question, as to the, comparing the ways that the Shang / Cho and the Assyrians and the Persians all ruled, because they all rule sort of through different philosophical ideas, through different perspectives, whether it's the Shang and the Cho ruling through really the Cho dynasty ruling through the mandate of heaven, the Assyrians and the way they rule, and the Persians the way they rule. So they're all different, different methods of ruling. So good. Okay. I don't know, guys. Is this helpful at all? What do you think? Is this helpful? Let's take some more questions. What are the Amarna letters? Okay, so let's talk about the Amarna letters. So we talked about the Amarna letters. You read the Amarna letters. The Amarna letters is an archive. It's an archive consisting of what were called diplomatic correspondences, basically letters between Egypt and the pharaohs in Egypt, and their representatives all throughout basically the Middle East, Mesopotamia. In addition, it's letters from Egypt to other kings in the area, such as the Hittite kings and other important officials not from Egypt itself. Why is it called the Amarna letters? Because they were found in Amarna. Amarna is a city that was a city in Egypt. It was Amarna was the capital of Pharaoh Akhenaten. You don't need to memorize that, but that's why it's called, that's why they're called the Amarna letters. They're unusual for a number of reasons. First of all, they're written mostly in Akkadian. They're not written in hieroglyphics, which is interesting because the Egyptians wrote in hieroglyphics. And so the language that's used is, again, the Akkadian. The Akkadian is the writing system of ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Babylonia, the old Babylonian Empire, meaning the letters are not written in hieroglyphics, which is what the Egyptians, the written language the Egyptians utilized. That is significant and somewhat strange, and that makes the Amarna letters somewhat unusual. The Amarna letters are significant because they shed light on the culture and the language and really the history of what's taking place in the area, in areas of Egypt and Canaan, and the areas of the Middle East. And that's how we know from these people. That's what we know from. And so again, they're sending letters throughout the Middle East, again, to Canaan, to other parts of the Middle East, and we learned tremendous amounts of material from kingdoms, from peoples who are sending the letters back and forth. And that's what the Amarna letters are all about. Okay, I hope that's helpful there. Okay, regarding the test in general, is it all compare and contrast? And short answer, it's compare and contrast. It's asking you to think about sort of, it's talking about similarities and differences, thinking about the effects, sort of, I mean, the questions are similarities, differences, comparing and contrasting. There's some questions which you should be familiar with that we discussed in class, and sort of trying to understand the characteristics of specific eras that we discussed. So whether just or defining and talking about the characteristics of the Bronze Age, Those are the kinds of questions that are being asked in the test. Similarities, differences. Yeah, so those are the kinds of questions that are being asked. Okay. Okay. Kayla's question: what kinds of questions are you going to ask about the assigned reading on the test? The reading questions that you have on the test are going to be, they're mostly, you're going to have a choice, by the way, in the first section. In section 1, you'll have to do 4 questions. In section 2, you'll do, 4 out of 5. And in section 2, you'll do 4 out of, I don't know, 8 or 9 questions. So meaning you'll have a choice, particularly in the second section, of different questions to answer. I'm not, and you'll, sorry, in a second, you'll have 5 questions to answer, not 4. You'll have 5 questions to answer out of probably 8 or 9. I don't want to make this any longer, largely because I want you to finish. So, so that's important. You'll have time to finish. You'll have time to complete the exam. So I don't want you to really have to answer a lot of questions in a short amount of time. So. So let's see. So okay, let's go back to your question. Yeah, so on the assigned reading, you're going to have questions on just reading comprehension based on the actual article itself, asking you to identify specific elements of the reading. Those are the questions you'll get, and you'll get probably at least one question where you have to think about the article in relation to what we discussed in class. And so I'll give you something to compare what we learned in the article. I'll give you something to compare that to, and to offer your thoughts about that. Okay, good. Will I answer questions during the test? Yes, I will. Okay. This is just for tomorrow. I know some of you said you have a Chumash test tomorrow during period 8. So I went down to the office and talked about it with Ms. Kier, with Bonnie. If you have a Chumash test tomorrow, and if you have extra time, meaning you can't come and start the history test during 8th period, then you will, I think it's only 2 of you who have this. You'll start the test at the beginning of 9th period, and then you will continue it during Mincha. I know that's usually not allowed, but we're going to make an exception for this case. If, again, you have extra time, you're going to come to the Beit Midrash during 8th period, and for those who don't have extra time, you'll come to the Beit Midrash at the beginning of 9th period to start the exam. And just a reminder, I'm not going to be there during 8th period. I will be there during 9th period, during our regular class. Okay, good. That answers that. Okay, from Jack. Well, we need to know about the text of all the artifacts found from the ancient Israelites, or just how we can compare them and the opinions. No, you don't need to know the entire texts of each of the artifacts. You need to know what the artifacts were. You need to know what they stand for, what their meaning is, and what they add, if they add anything, to our understanding of the ancient Israelites. I'm not expecting you to know what the actual text, what the entire text says. Generally, you have to know what the text is referring to. So if it's the pure papyrus, I don't want you to memorize the text, but I want you to know that the pure papyrus concerns or mentions the existence of blood as running, and that has possible some relation to the 10 plagues, or what the Mesha stele is discussing. Again, I'm not asking you. You don't need to memorize. I don't expect you to memorize the actual text itself, but you have to have a very broad and very general overview of the meaning of the text, and that's what you need to know for that. You don't need to memorize each of the pieces of text. Okay. let's see. Okay, what's the difference between linear A and linear B? Asks Isaac. So, sorry, I'm just tired, guys. Been a long day. Sorry, where was I? The difference between linear A and linear B. So linear A is the Minoans. The Minoans use linear A. We have no idea what it says. We can't read it. Linear B was created by the Mycenaeans, and we have been able to decipher linear B. It was deciphered by archaeologists in 1952. It's adapted from linear A. We able to decipher linear B because it's an early form of ancient Greek, and there is a strong relation or very similar relation between linear B and ancient Greek, and that's why we've been able to decipher it. That's not the case, however, with linear A. Okay. Can we please go over Knossos? Knossos was the palace of the Minoans. It was the palace of Knossos. It was a very large palace, 800 rooms. It had indoor plumbing. It had frescoes. The artwork of the Minoans was featured all throughout Knossos. That's basically what we discussed. Okay, good. This is from Noah. Will you allow us to answer more than required and think our best? No. You have to make the decision which questions you are going to answer. I am not going to, if I tell you to answer 5 and you answer 7, I am not going to pick your best 5. That's not what I do. Sorry. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Okay. Let's see, can we go over the artifacts from the ancient Israelites? We can mention them very briefly. We're not going to go over them in the detail we went over them in class. So the artifacts we went over the Pure Papyrus. We talked about the large stone structure outside of, or in the Ir David area outside of the gates of Yerushalayim. The large stone structure and the stepstone structure. Eilat Mazar claiming that this was part of David's palace. We discussed the fact that the artifacts discovered do not lead to the conclusion that the structure has anything to do with King David. We discussed the Menerpta stele, inscription by the Egyptian king Menerpta. The Menerpta stele talks about Menerpta's victory over his enemies, and it includes the first mention of Israel and the fact that Israel was laid to waste by Menerpta. It's the first documented instance of the name Israel and the only name in ancient Israel. We went and talked about the black obelisk of Shalmaneser III. This is a Neo-Assyrian from the reign of King Shalmaneser III. This talks about, it displays the earliest the earliest ancient depiction of a biblical figure, King Yehu, the king of Israel. Text talks about the money, the tribute that Yehu had to give to Shalmaneser, and there's both a text as well as an artistic depiction of Yehu actually bowing down to Shalmaneser III. We talked about the Mesha stele. The Mesha stele created around the year 840 by King Mesha of Moab, talking about the Chemosh, the god of Moab, was angry with his people and allowed them to be subjugated to the kingdom of Israel. And you guys read the various narratives associated with the Mesha stele. The Mesha stele is the most extensive inscription. Excuse me. It refers to the king of Israel. It includes a reference to Yahweh, meaning Yahweh being God, the God of the Israelites. We looked at the Shiloach inscription, the inscription found in the Silwan tunnel that brought water to the city of David. Remember, the Shiloach inscription is describing a construction event. And we talked about the Lachish relief, the stone panels narrating the Assyrian victory of Sancherib over the kingdom of Judah in 701 BC, including the siege of Lachish. And those are the different artifacts that we discussed. Let's see. Are you going to return our election night extra credits? Yeah, I will. I just have to post it. It's just, let's see. I'll post it after we finish. So you guys have the extra credits. If you handed it in, then you got full credit for the extra credits. So that's just to give you a sense of what you got. So if you handed it in that night, then you get the extra credit. Okay, so that's good. Is our test on haiku? No, your test is not haiku. You're going to be writing your test, actually. Isaac, what are the Dark Ages? In general, the Dark Ages is a period when little happens, whether in culture, whether in developments of a civilization. We talked about the fact that the ancients, that the Assyrians undergo a Dark Ages from about 1200 to 900. We talked about the fact that the Greeks, that the Mycenaeans, there's a Dark Age when it comes to the Mycenaeans also. There's a Dark Age in the ancient Greek world. A Dark Ages is when we know little of what happens, and it seems that little happens in terms of the developments of culture. Okay, so I hope that helps. Okay, let's see. Are we missing anything? Okay. All right. Any more questions, guys? Let's see. No, it's looking for the Mycenaean timeline has 5 different main points. Yes, that is true. Can I give you examples of some compare and contrast questions? I mean, again, I've already mentioned a couple of examples. Compare and contrast. See. Comparing, let's say, do you find similarities or differences in the way Hammurabi and Cyrus ruled their empires? Something like that. That's a compare. It's finding similarities and differences, comparing and contrasting. Something. So that's the kind of that would be similar. That would be a question I would potentially ask. Okay. Ari, if we answer all the questions instead of picking 5 for the second half, is there extra credit? No, there's not. There's not going to be extra credits. Do we write or pen or pencil? I would prefer pen, but I'm not gonna, nothing's gonna happen if you write in pencil. How did the Second Babylonian Empire collapse? The Neo-Babylonian Empire collapses because they are conquered. The Neo-Babylonians are conquered, as we said, by a combination of by the Persian Empire. The Persians defeat the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and therefore they are defeated. Knossos was the palace. You said Knossos was the palace. I thought we learned it was the capital city, and yes, correct. That is true. No, yes, Knossos was the city, and there was a palace within the city. That is correct. How long do our answers need to be? From Joseph, they need to be. I'm going to tell you in the test they need to be 4 to 5 sentences, because I don't want you to spend time writing 10 or 12 sentences. Each of these questions is potentially, an essay. I want you to have the time to finish the exam, and I want you to be able to get to all the questions on the exam. And as such, I'm going to ask you for 4 to 5 sentences each in answering the questions. Okay. How important would the textbook reading be in comparison to our notes? Honestly, a lot of what we discussed in class was something that what you had in the textbook. So a lot of the material in the textbook is material that we mentioned in class. Okay. Any additional questions, guys? Whoa. If we write less, or let's say not have enough info, would you take off points? Meaning, if you answer the question in 3 sentences and it's fully answered, yeah, fine, okay, good. I'm not going to take off points for that. So when you say each answer is an essay, you mean a 1-paragraph essay, correct? No, meaning each question you have, meaning each question on the test potentially is a very long essay. I'm not asking you to write a very long essay. No, I'm simply saying that I want you to answer the question in really just 4 to 5 sentences maximum, even though you could spend pages and pages and pages and pages writing answers to the questions. If we would write less, or let's say not have enough, would you take off points? I said answer that before. Would you suggest to read over our notes and reread the textbook to study? Yeah, and again, as I said before when we started, when you're rereading your notes, when you're thinking about your notes, again, don't just memorize the facts, but think about how the facts relate to each other, how the various empires relate to each other, how the various cultures, the similarities, the differences. That's what you want to think about. I don't understand. This is from No. I don't understand when the Babylonians come in. I am confused whether it is during the time of ancient Mesopotamia or the Persian Empire, since they were conquered by the Persians. So we talked about in class the Babylonians. We talked about the Old Babylonian Empire and the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The Old Babylonian Empire is the empire established by Hammurabi. That's the Old Babylonian Empire. The New Babylonian Empire is the Chaldeans and the Medes defeating the Assyrian Empire, and then they were conquered by the Persians. So we're talking, just like we talk about the Neo-Assyrian, we're talking about the Neo-Babylonian Empire. So there are 2 Babylonian empires that we discussed. Okay. Good. Let's see. Anything else here? Okay. What else is there? Okay, I think that answers your question, Noah. Any other questions, guys? Any other questions to answer? From Ethan, it's hard for us to compare one topic to one other. With all of the notes we have written down, how are we supposed to compare one topic to another when we have over 20 topics to know? How are we supposed to compare then? Again, you're when I'm asking you to compare, I'm not asking you for every single detail. I'm asking for you to think about not just no. What I'm asking you to do is not just to know the material, not just to know the facts, not just to know the specific details, but when you read about the empire created by Cyrus, what I want you to think, what I want your mind to do, and what I want you to think about is okay. We talked about empire, and what you should be doing is we talked about empire in the context of Syria and context of Cyrus and the Persians. Where else did we talk about empire? And to draw those connections. Those are the meaningful connections when we're talking about the historical narrative that you guys need to that you guys should be thinking about. That's what I'm trying to push for you to sort of see and to understand. Sivia, my mom says you look tired. Yes, I am tired. Coming back from sophomore slam. Sophomore slam was great. You guys are gonna have a great time on it next year. But getting 3 hours of sleep a night over sophomore slam, not that easy. um, from Rachel, in which empire did women have the most rights? Interesting. Okay. Which empire did women have the most rights? Huh. That's an interesting question. Um, Not sure. That's a good question. Let me think about that for a second. Which empire do they have the most rights? Well, in see, probably in ancient Sumerian culture, they had the rights. They could own property. They can join the lower ranks of the priesthood. They couldn't attend schools, but they had significant rights in ancient Sumeria, I think. So, I think that I think when we're thinking about it, that's probably where they have the greatest number of rights. So I would say ancient Sumeria. Okay. So can you compare each social structure we discussed? No, I'm not going to compare. Hope I'm not going to compare. I'm not going to compare each social structure. That's what you have to do. I'm not going to. I'm not going to do the work for you. So, um, okay, let's say we'll do this. Let's say it's 9:17 now. We'll do this until 9:25. Okay, so we have about, I don't know, 7 or 8 more minutes or so. Um, Ethan, what was the Cyrus cylinder? The Cyrus cylinder was a artifact that was found, the only artifact, in fact, that was found from Cyrus himself, and from the age of Cyrus himself. And the cylinder, it's very small. It's maybe this big. It's very small, but it contains within it a text describing a couple of things. First of all, the fact that it talks about the fact that the Persians are just greater than the Babylonians. But it also talks about the Cyrus cylinder. Also talks about the fact that the Persians, specifically Cyrus, allowed various peoples to travel back to their ancestral homes, to their old homes, and so the cylinder talks about the fact that peoples who had been replaced by the Assyrians could go back to their old homes, restore temples, restore their religious developments, and that's what they can do. And they would be allowed to return to their old homes, and that's what the Cyrus Cylinder really discusses. No, Hope, I'm not going. I'm not going over each social structure. First of all, there's just 5 minutes left, and I'm not going through each social structure. And secondly, again, that's what you have to be studying. You have to be studying all these social structures. I'm not going to go through every single detail. I'm not going to reteach the material again here. Okay, if Noah did the ancient Mesopotamian government go from priests to military commanders, how did that work? Meaning, yes, it develops from the structure develops from priests through eventually going to military commanders. At least initially, priests held political power. Military commanders became rulers, and military commanders then began to pass rule down to their own families, and this created a dynasty, rulers descending from a single family line. Again, over the course of hundreds of years in ancient Mesopotamia, the ancient city-states, the priests who were first in charge of both politics and religion slowly lost their political power to those who controlled the armies. And the armies were the ones that were able to really assert dominance, assert control, and that's what happened in ancient Sumeria. Okay, this is from Jojo. Will we have to know about the essay we just wrote about the Judaism? No, meaning, I'm not expecting you to know that chapter. You need to know that chapter for the essay. You don't need to know the chapter for the book. For the exam. You need to know the artifacts of the ancient Israelites, but you don't need to know the. I'm not going to be testing you on the. I'm not going to be testing you on the chapter itself. Okay. Good. Okay. Okay. Any other questions, guys? We still have 13 people watching. I'm glad you're watching. Can I explain the textbook readings we need to know? The textbook readings are on the haiku page, are on the review sheet. I'm not going to explain the textbook readings. Again, much of what we do in class is explaining the textbook readings and expanding on it. From Noah, were the only 2 Egyptian times we learned about the early dynastic period in the Old Kingdom? Yes, correct. Those are the only periods that we talked about in depth in class. The early dynastic and the Old Kingdom. That is correct. You're welcome, Jojo. I'm glad this helped. Reason why I think this is helpful is, first of all, it's just more time. Even though we started late, we're still going to be doing this for about an hour and, hour and 15 minutes or so. I think it's just better than sitting in class for 41 minutes where inevitably most of the time is going to be spent stopping everyone from talking. That's not commenting on our class. That's in any class that you do a review. People are going to be talking. I think this is just easier where you can just ask the questions. You can be listening. You can not be listening. You can just ask the questions and I can answer them without having to sort of push through everything and everything else that, that's going on in class. Okay, so I guess we'll end here, guys. If you don't have any more questions, we can end here. Again, just a reminder, we're taking the test in the Beit Midrash. If you have extra time, come during 8th period. If you're taking your Chumash test and you have extra time, then you'll start at the beginning of 9th period and you will continue into Mincha. If not, then if you have regular time, then come to the Beit Midrash at 9th period. Am I going to be able to meet tomorrow? My free periods tomorrow are, I have a free first, I have a free second. Tomorrow's Tuesday. I have a free fourth, and I have a free seventh. I think that's it. Yeah, that's what I have free tomorrow. Guys, my pleasure. I hope this helped. I hope this shed some light on the material, and you're able to ask the questions. Before I sign off, I just want to let you know that the test isn't there to get you. It's not there to make your grade come down. The test isn't here to sort of make you worried. The test is for me to see how much you've gained, for you to see how much you've gained. The test isn't there to trick you. The questions aren't there to trick you. The plan isn't for you to be tricked. The plan isn't for, I'm not crafting the most complicated question to try to throw you off. The questions are going to be straightforward. They're going to allow you to take not just one piece of information, but in theory, multiple pieces of information, and apply that knowledge in answering the question. That's the goal, and that's the goal of this. The goal isn't to trip you up. It's not to to get you on whether you know a single detail or not, whether you can memorize a specific date. If I ask, that's not the point of this test. It's not the point of studying history. So don't think that that's going to be the purpose. Obviously, you have to answer the questions, and you have to answer the questions with factual material, but you're not expected to memorize everything. You're not expected to know everything. I want to see how you're thinking. I want to see your thoughts, and that's the key. So, all right, guys, have a great night. I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye now.